So, welcome to our From Performance Review to Performance Culture, the Manager's Role webinar. Let's kick off with an activity as normal, really, for our webinars. I want you to think back to the last kind of formal annual performance review that you had to prepare for. Either it was your annual performance review or you were preparing it for a team member that you were about to do their annual review for. And on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you actually feel about that process at the time that you were doing that kind of preparation? Where one is you kind of really anxious about doing it, hated the thought of it, dreaded it, and up to 5 where you were really excited and motivated about doing it. If you'd just like to pop in chat a score between 1 and 5, that would be absolutely brilliant, please. Yeah, so we've got 2s, mainly 3s to 4. Yeah, so somewhere in that kind of middle grounding for the majority of people. So for our next question, again, answers in chat. Just complete one of those 2 sentences, just with a few words in chat. Just one of those 2 sentences, just complete it in chat. The most stressful part of the annual review is, or the one thing the annual review fails to provide is. Yeah. So we've got coming up with smart objectives, ongoing performance feedback, the preparation for it. It fails to provide that 360 feedback, constructive feedback on performance levels for the period being discussed, more regular feedback, development conversation, ongoing kind of feedback that the annual review fails to do. And absolutely so. And those feelings that you've kind of described there and your thoughts about them, the frustrations around them, they are the direct result of traditionally we have thought about performance reviews almost as an event. And the purpose of today is to really shift to from seeing performance as a performance event rather and move it towards actually developing a performance culture, which takes into account many of the frustrations that you have highlighted there and the things that annual reviews actually fail to do. So for the next 55 minutes or so, we're going to look at how we can actually fix that by moving to this continuous performance culture that minimizes then fear and maximizes learning and growth. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan. I'm the founding partner and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. I originally started my career in the hospitality sector, working in both operational and leadership positions, and then some 25 years ago now, moved across into learning and development after revisiting university and doing my CIPD qualifications. That's the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development qualifications. And my work has taken me far and wide over the last 25 years, working with organisations not only throughout the UK, but also in the UAE, Europe, and the USA, in both the public and corporate world. Academically, I started off obviously with hospitality and leadership and management qualifications, but soon went on and actually did a degree in psychology. And then for the last 16 years, I have very much been involved in studying neuroscience. I'm part of a worldwide group that collectively we call ourselves the Neuro Nerds. And we come together once a month online and just talk about some of the latest research that's going on in neuroscience and how, if it can at all, actually apply to the world of work. And just general life in general. So that's a little bit about me and my background. So some of the key takeaways for today, we're going to be looking at the underpinning neuroscience and the use of models, some of the neuroscience models, to help us minimize that kind of the threat and maximize that engagement and learning and growth from a performance culture. We're going to be looking at the simple, what we call the PI check-in model, which is all about effective, frequent, structured, one-to-one type conversations that eliminate this need for the annual performance kind of surprises, shall we call them. We're going to look at how we can leverage our knowledge of behavioural preferences to personalise this kind of more coaching style approach to performance, and recognising the individual behaviours, preferences of each team member. We're also going to look at mastering a three-step process for creating the SMART goals that are clear, motivating, and most importantly, directly connected to that broader kind of business objective. And lastly, we're going to be looking at what is known as the situation behaviour impact framework to help us deliver objective, timely feedback that resolves those kind of performance gaps and kind of enables or facilitates greater development and growth of individuals. As usual, the webinar will be delivered in chapters. In chapter 1, we're going to focus on the neuroscience of performance. We're then going to, in chapter 2, look as the manager as coach, continuous check-ins and leverage of behavioural preferences. In chapter 3, it's around that setting clear and aligned goals and expectations using the three-step goal setting framework. And then in chapter 4, the art of effective feedback and using feedback as a tool for growth and improvement. So, as highlighted in the activity at the beginning of the webinar, the traditional kind of approach to performance reviews can create anxiety, dread. People at best are kind of go along with doing it. They're somewhere, as we showed, in that kind of middle range between 1 and 5 on a scale of, you know, from fear to kind of absolutely being wow, motivated, loving performance reviews. Then it's very much around that middle ground. And for both parties, that is, both for the manager and for the team member. And very often that then leads to having a counterproductive effect, because I'm sure we've all been there, well, we have all been there, trying to kind of distill 364 days of work into one single document, an event, rushing around to collect feedback that actually feels so distant and it is now kind of irrelevant. It's been, it's gone, it's past, we've moved on. And it's ultimately delivering some kind of rating it usually involves that often can actually minimize future motivation rather than maximizing it. And the hard truth is the traditional annual performance review is broken, and for very simple reasons. It treats performance as an event, not a continuous, ongoing process. And it's a little bit like an analogy I like to use about it is it's like waiting till the end of a marathon to check if one of the runners needs a water break. Yeah, it's over, it's done with. It's too late, it's past. It's retrospective, it's administrative, and worst of all, it tends to trigger massive threat response in the brain, instantly shutting down our access to cognitive abilities, which involves that learning and growth. So the key shift that we must make, and the focus of this entire session, is really around moving from the performance event to a high performing culture. And this is nothing that is new. I mean, I recall certainly 8, if not 10 years ago, in some of the neuro leadership summits and things that I attend, you know, this was already happening in organizations. The performance review, the traditional kind of performance review, was being kicked out. It was being got rid of to move towards this. So this is something that, you know, as I say, is not new. It's just for many organizations, they're just taking a long time to kind of catch up with it. So moving from the performance event to the performance culture is where your role as a manager becomes even more critical than ever, because you're not just an evaluator or an administrator of it. Actually, we should see that role of the manager more in the terms of a chief performance architect for your team. And your job is therefore to facilitate that continuous growth, providing that clarity to create a high engagement environment where excellent performance is the norm rather than the exception. So again, over the next 50 minutes or so now, we're going to show you how to actually swap that once a year anxiety for daily empowering kind of coaching that drives real results and builds a truly engaged, future ready, which is very important these days, team. So moving on to some of the neuroscience here then. We've just talked about how the traditional annual review is broken. And now let's look at it from a brain's perspective, why it's broken. Your brain, my brain, everybody's brain is constantly scanning the environment, questioning every single piece of information. And it's something like 10,000 pieces of information per second are actually taken in through our five senses. And every piece of information going in through those five senses is constantly being checked. Is it a potential threat or is this a reward? And if there is any doubt about it at all, it will automatically be categorized as a threat. So if we just think about the traditional performance review, what do you think then are some of those perceived threats and possibly rewards of a traditional performance review? If you just want to pop any thought you've got around those perceived threats of the traditional performance review from a brain's perspective, what do you think happens in a performance review that the brain is going to go, whoa, this is a potential threat here? Just pop your answers in chat for me. Poor rating, job loss, absolutely, yeah. Perception I haven't done a good enough job. Yeah. Worried about being criticised. Managers worried about the individual, your team members' reaction. Yeah, absolutely. Feedback could be negative, unexpected conversations, that surprise element. Yeah, natural pessimism. Absolutely. Yeah, these high stakes, the surprise feedback, that potential change in pay or status or even loss of job. When your brain perceives these as a threat, it perceives it as a social threat, it triggers the same physical survival response that it would do if you walked out into the middle of the road and there was a double-decker bus that you hadn't seen coming straight towards you. So the threat signal of that element of surprise, that anticipation of kind of that worry and fear of what is going to be said, have I performed well enough, etc. That signals an instant message, threat signal to the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is buried. It's part of the older, for those people who still refer to the triad brain, the older reptilian brain. It's part of our emotional network and often referred to as our fear center or our threat detector. And when the amygdala becomes active, when it's triggered, then it hijacks the prefrontal cortex. So that's the part of the brain that immediately sits behind the kind of the forehead. And that's where we do all our cognitive, logical, rational, problem solving, creative thinking. Very complex kind of thinking goes on in there. And when we trigger a threat response, it literally inhibits our ability to learn, to actually accept, to process and accept feedback and think strategically about the future. You go into a survival or protective state, fight, flight or freeze, and we're no longer to perform at our best. It's kind of like we just don't have access, our cognitive logical thinking is impaired. And conversely, when the brain perceives something that you say or that you do as a reward, the amygdala is not triggered, it's not engaged. And therefore, we have full access to the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. And this is a state where you're most open to listening, to coaching, we're at our most creative, we can do our best thinking, and we're most likely to engage in the very behaviours that we want to actually see to have high performing culture, innovation, collaboration, rapid kind of learning. We're able to actually do that if we are in a reward state. So as managers, the primary goal is to move people away from threat and towards the reward in every single interaction, communication, every behaviour that you have with another person. We want to move people from that protective mode to a productive mode. But how do we manage something as complex as social threat? Well, we need a framework, and that brings us to one of the most powerful and practical neuroscience models for managers. Now, I work with the model known as the SCARE model. Some of you may be familiar with the SCARF model, but I tend to work with the SCARE model, which is very similar, basically. The SCARE model was actually developed by Linda Ray. The SCARF model was developed by Dr. David Rock. And Linda developed the SCARE model to categorise those 5 social domains that activate the primary threat and reward centres in our brain. Now, understanding these 5 domains gives us a practical map for leading our team each and every day. Now, SCARE stands for significance, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and equity. So if you are familiar with the SCARF model, you will actually see the kind of correlation there. So in this session, we're going to treat the SCARE model as your secret weapon. Every strategy we discuss today, from check-ins to feedback, is designed to minimise threat and maximise reward across these 5 domains. And that by doing that, we're then setting the tone for that performance culture that is fundamentally rooted in brain-friendly principles. But just before we move on, let's just quickly remind ourselves of those 5 domains. So significance, that's the need to feel valued, respected, and important. Certainty, that's the need for predictability and stability. Autonomy, the need for control and agency. Relatedness, the need for that connection and that sense of belonging. And last, equity, the need for justice and equality. So here are a few examples in which a threat response in the 5 domains may be triggered, and then some possible kind of ways of minimizing that threat and moving people more towards the reward response. And I'll just give you a moment or two just to have a look at some of those on screen. The one that always sticks in for me, so many times, and certainly, I've done it, we've all done it, and we've all been on the receiving end of it as well. When your manager comes up and says, "Can I just have a quick word?" And automatically they have triggered a threat response. And then they turn around, they ask you something really straightforward and simple. And how often have you kind of stood there and gone, stuttering and stammering? Because your brain has immediately gone into that threat response. Your cognitive abilities were temporarily shut down. And it just takes that few seconds just to get it all back online once we realise that this isn't a threat situation. So creating that certainty, always letting people know, in advance if you can, I want to, could we schedule a 5-minute, 15-minute catch up later today? I just want to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. So you're minimizing that threat all the time. But those are a few of the ways in which you can actually minimize the threat and move people, as I say, closer to the rewards. And by implementing these small, they are only small changes, but they're brain-friendly adjustments. And this can help you consistently keep your team in that reward state, where they're more engaged, more resilient, more open to learning and coaching and growth, all things that are necessary for that high performance culture. So, okay, we've armed ourselves with the language of the brain, the scare model. We know that to get consistent growth, we must move people out of this threat state into a reward state. So now I want to look at a tool that you can use every day to apply that knowledge, the continuous check-in. So the annual review process is inherently threatening, as we've discussed, because it offers zero certainty throughout the year. It's really is like everything is a surprise when it comes to that time of the year. So to build a true performance culture, then we've got to replace that single high stakes event with a pattern of frequent low stake interactions. And this is the power of frequent connection. It's like giving your team a constant drip feed of safety and clarity, directly minimizing that certainty threat. But these check-ins shouldn't just be status updates. They need to be dedicated, structured, coaching style conversations. And we need a simple framework to ensure that every time we meet with a team member, we're addressing the core elements of performance and development. And for that, we use the PI, the check-in model, the PI check-in model. So by using PI, it ensures that our conversations are holistic and brain friendly. So the P stands for performance. Where are we at on the work? Now, here, rather than just asking a very blunt, kind of direct question, where are you at on that work? Because that, again, can trigger that threat response. Try softening it a little bit. Try having a little bit more brain-friendly, humanized approach to it. You could try something like saying, what are you most proud of doing, accomplishing since we last spoke? You know, what part of that success are you ready to be able to replicate on other projects or even teach and show other team members? Now, that question is effective because it reinforces status. You're asking people, what are you most proud of? And that immediately validates their work and recognizes their value and expertise. And that's a really powerful status reward. It focuses on the positive behaviours. It directs the conversation towards successful behaviours and outcomes. And that encourages, again, that move towards the reward state. It encourages autonomy and mastery. Because that second part of the kind of question, what part of that success are you ready to replicate, positions the employee as a bit of an expert. And it reinforces their autonomy, the control that they have over their own knowledge, and supports their desire for kind of growing and developing their skills. It also promotes future action because it naturally sets up the conversation for the next steps, asking them to identify the behaviours they could repeat. And that provides certainty for future work. So this approach ensures the check-ins is an opportunity for celebration and strategic reflection rather than just a status update. This is where we're at. The I is for individual. So how are you doing and what are your goals? Really is the kind of the theme here, all about addressing relatedness. Now, one question that I always recommend should be included in performance check-ins is, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your current energy and capacity level? So this is asking about the human. I'm showing I'm interested, I care about you, the individual. And this question helps us to focus on protecting that team member's brain capacity, which means that they're going to be more able to perform at the best. Because when that individual's kind of capacity, when their energy levels are low, when the workloads are high, for example, then that capacity threshold, and it's different for everyone, could well be exceeded. And as soon as we start to reach that capacity threshold and it tips over, a threat response is triggered, and that further impairs performance. But by asking about that question about capacity and energy, then as the manager, you can ensure that team members' workload is correctly prioritised against their capacity. Now, that may mean that sometimes we have to deprioritise some tasks because, for whatever reason, whatever's going on with that individual, their capacity at the moment is just way too high, and that's triggering that threat response. But you need them to do a really good piece of work on certain things, so you need to actually look at what can you deprioritise. Now, I appreciate not every manager will go along with that. That might not get the approval of some managers, but it's certainly a far better alternative to overloading team members so that their actual capacity is exceeded, a threat response is triggered, and the performance will naturally decrease because of their impaired cognitive ability. And the E stands for expectations. What's next? Ensuring that there's real clarity around what the next steps are and what your expectations of them are. This is all about maximizing certainty so that when at the end of that conversation, your team member goes away energized, we've actually pushed them towards the reward state, the productive state, as opposed to the protective state, the threat state. We've created some certainty in doing that. They know exactly what you are expecting in the forthcoming days. And if we constantly use this pie structure, then we will naturally just be continually minimizing threats and reinforcing rewards. So a great coach manager knows that one size does not fit all. It never works. And this is where we take our performance conversation then beyond the basics and into personalization. We can't coach, we can't support, we can't speak with everyone in the same way. The way you give your feedback, the way you set goals, or even provide recognition needs to match the individual team members' preferences. So in this next segment, we're going to show you how leveraging behavioural preferences, how it can, whether that you do it through a formal profile, something like the Jigsaw discovery tool, for example, our behavioural map, or it's just to having that deep understanding of your people. But all this information allows you to tailor those pie check-ins to truly unlock the potential of each team member. And this will then obviously ensure that the team members, they feel seen, they feel respected, and that reinforces that status and fairness. So if we just take a closer look at how knowing their behavioural preferences can make your performance conversations even more effective, then understanding your team members' natural way of working, knowing their preferred communication style, their need for detail or not, how they prefer to receive information, how do they define success. All these things are the things that help you to tailor your pie check-ins. Again, minimizing threat, maximizing reward, having that positive impact on the scare domains. Before we look at a couple of specific examples where you can kind of see it in action, just a quick reminder, the Jigsaw Discovery Behavioural Framework simplifies human behaviour into 4 foundational behaviours. Now, it's not quite as simple as this. Once you actually build a profile and develop your own behavioural map, you'll see it's a little bit more complex than that. But if we, for the purposes of today, just think about these 4 different kind of preferences as 4 distinct drivers that describe how an individual prefers to focus their energy and attention, how they prefer to be approached, how they prefer to communicate, even down to specific words that actually will resonate more with a person of a certain preference than with somebody of a different preference. So each style, each preference has a unique approach to the pace, how fast you move, how fast you speak, and the priority. What are their personal key drivers, key priorities? So if we take team member A, this person thrives on structure and logic. Now, if you actually present in a rather, if you speak rather fast and you're rather vague with the information, then that is certainly going to trigger a threat response, a certainty threat response straight away. So it's thinking about how can we do this. So instead of saying, how's the project going? Be much more specific. Explain it, ask specific kind of questions, perhaps even provide an agenda before the meeting. Rather than talking about challenges with this person, we would need to frame a challenge as perhaps just a kind of a logical puzzle that their expertise can help you find solutions for. And when setting the expectations, the E of the pie, then very much focus first of all on the process, the detail, the timeline, and checking in all the time that the exact specific steps are very clear to that particular team member. Now, if we have a look at a second team member then, this team member is highly sensitive to kind of rules and policies, workload equity, transparency in decision making, and they need clear, consistent processes for promotion, for wage increases, for how work is assigned, for example, because it's very much an inconsistency, again, creates a certainty threat. They're looking for that fairness, that sense of belonging, of relatedness to the work. So we need to actually, be transparent about why decisions are made. Ensure that workload is perceived as fair and balanced. Prioritize that personal connection. So don't just launch in and start conversations about the work. Always start with the people aspect first. And ensure that the team culture that you're building and creating actually has that supportive element and feels inclusive to people. So there we've got 2 contrasting actual approaches, needs and wants, and how, as a manager, we need to kind of tailor, personalize, if you like, our approach, even though we're still using the pie model, but it's how we actually go beyond that to personalize it, leveraging the behavioral preferences. So we're just going to stop or I'm going to stop talking for a couple of minutes and just give you a couple of minutes reflection time. And I'm just going to, on screen, put some 4 or 5 questions just for you to kind of guide your thinking. And to do this, what I would suggest you do, and you're not going to have to share this, so there's no confidentiality or anything like that going to come into it. I want you to kind of bring one of your team members into mind, and then just take a couple of minutes, as I say, just to think about that team member and the questions that I'm about to put up on screen. So one achievement you can proactively celebrate with this person before you discuss challenges with them. A non-work subject or career goal that you could genuinely check in with that will build relatedness. The next step for a project. What one phrase would you use with that specific individual to increase certainty and minimize any anxiety threat response? Would you be able to identify their behavioural preference for this team? And based on that knowledge, how would you tailor your approach with them? So I'm now going to shut up for 2 minutes, leave you to have a think. If anybody wants to share anything, by all means, you can pop any thoughts that you have into chat, but I am not, asking for that. That's entirely up to you. So I will be back in 2 minutes. Okay, we will move into chapter 3. As I say, if anybody wants to put anything in chat, any of your thoughts, please do so, but that's entirely your choice. So chapter 3. We've now established that great coaching happens continuously, if we use the kind of pie check-in. But coaching is only effective if you are coaching people towards a clear target, a clear goal. And the biggest single enemy of employee motivation and productivity is having vague goals. Think about the last time you gave or received a goal, something along the lines of, we need to improve customer satisfaction, or we need to be, as a team, we need to be more productive. If you've received a kind of a goal like that, how did you feel at that time? Because very often it actually leaves us feeling a bit confused. We're a bit unsure where to focus because, we're all busy people. We've only got limited time. So where do I start to improve customer satisfaction, for example? Or where do I start to be more productive? Or where do we as a team start to be more productive? Just put a simple yes in chat if you have been in this position at some point, either as, like most of us will have done, I'm sure, at some point, given out those quite vague kind of goals, or actually been on the receiving end of a vague goal. Definitely. Yeah. I think in honesty, for most of us, we have, at some point. More often than not, Matt says, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we have. We've all left meetings where we're not really clear on what we need to do now. What's really expected of me? I'm not too sure. And all this is a massive threat to our certainty. And again, it can sometimes feel like, what are the rules of the game? They seem to be constantly shifting. The rules of the game, again, creating a threat to our fairness. So when goals are vague, the manager tends to be the person that holds all the power, and the team member tends to feel powerless. So to build that high performance culture, we need a simple process for creating goals that are clear, that are motivating, and directly tied to the strategy. Hence, moving people towards that reward. So we suggest using a 3-step goal setting framework to accomplish it. First of all, align. Before we start writing things down, we must establish that alignment. The team member needs to know how their daily effort connects to the company's bigger mission. So as managers, we need to kind of have the answer to how does this individual's goal contribute to the team priority, to the company mission, the bigger picture. And that step is absolutely crucial for minimizing the threat to fairness by showing people the bigger picture and where their work fits. And you can demonstrate that transparency and respect for their strategic role, proving that their work is, it's not just about busy work. It's actually valuable, important work that contributes to that overall team and the larger organisation. Then we go to define. Having aligned goal, it's about defining the actual goal. So once you know the purpose of that individual team member's role, then we start to come up with a concrete goal. And for that, we suggest using the SMART framework, which I'm sure most people are very much aware of, because the SMART framework actually maximizes certainty because it eliminates any ambiguity. And as most of you probably know, SMART stands for specific. So what exactly will be done? Measurable, how will we know it's done? Use numbers, metrics, milestones. Is it realistic given the person's resources and time? Now that links back into that, thinking about the person's capacity, energy levels, capacity. The relevance of it. Does it actually connect? Is it aligned? So that takes us back to step one. And lastly, time bound. When is it going to be achieved by? Where's the finishing line? And a goal must, to be smart, must meet all 5 criteria. Because if a goal is clear and it's measurable, it does provide a powerful status reward every time the person hits one of those milestones. So it's creating continuous momentum, intrinsic motivation. And step 3 is track. So this is where, again, those pie check-ins. Don't set a goal for a year. Check in with it on every pie check-in. So it's a continuous evolving. And that goal becomes the roadmap then for your performance conversations. So during a check-in, you can simply ask, what progress have you made towards the measurable elements of your goal since we last spoke? What can I do to help remove some of those roadblocks possibly? And that way it ensures the goal is a roadmap, a guide, not a judge. So in a moment, I'm going to put a vague goal upon screen. And what I just want you to do is using those SMART criteria, just have a quick moment or two just to think about how could you make this goal specific, measurable and time bound? What are the key results that could possibly be tracked? And then just share any suggestions that you've got of what would be the measurable, what would the measurable part of this look like? Just share those thoughts in chat. So the goal is improve team collaboration. So what are the key results that you could actually track in regard to that? Just pop any thoughts you've got into chat. Yeah, team engagement scores. So external feedback, project collaboration examples, number of team lunches and socials. Yeah, absolutely. Very, very situational. And this kind of example, the classic vague goal, given in that format, just creates a threat to certainty and fairness straight away. So to make it smarter, we have got to look at that specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. We need to define concrete, observable actions and outcomes, key results that the manager could easily track and the individual could easily track. So, for example, it could be increase the average score on the quarterly engagement survey question, not questionnaire. So it's not saying increase it overall, even down to being really clear and specific. Actually, we want to increase the average score on a single question. I feel comfortable challenging my colleagues' ideas constructively. That's a great indicator of psychological safety, for example. And we want to increase it from 3.2 to 4. Yeah, that is very, very clear. So then we're starting to actually minimize all those threats because we've provided clarity, which provides certainty. And we're going to feel really great status-wise when it's actually achieved. So now we've considered how to set empowering goals, we've got to talk about the most sensitive and crucial part of the process, that giving and receiving of feedback. And this is the moment where fear often rushes back in, because nobody likes to give or receive feedback. Again, it's all linked into the brain and how we perceive potential threat and feedback. We tend to, usually based on learnt experience, feedback tends to be more when we've not got something right. More people give more negative feedback than people taking the time to actually give that positive feedback. And think about that in your own private kind of life. If you purchase something, if you go out for a meal, if the service or the food, let's say, in a meal was absolutely terrible, or the product that you bought didn't work, we're actually quite quick to complain about things these days. But we're not as quick to actually say, that was really great, thank you. So chapter 4 then, the art of effective feedback, which can all be about, we've structured our check-ins with Pi, we've set crystal clear smart goals now, but when things don't go as planned, and as I said, this is probably the most sensitive managerial skill of giving effective feedback. Because when done poorly, feedback is the biggest threat generator in the workplace. It attacks status and fairness. When done correctly, feedback is the most powerful tool for growth and autonomy. What if we think, though, about reframing feedback? And we start to reframe feedback as a gift. You are offering a perspective that the other person cannot see for themselves, because you are looking through a completely different lens. And thereby you're helping the team member not only to increase their own awareness of themselves, but also potentially learn and grow. So feedback is a gift. And if we reframe that in our mindset, it automatically, rather than the word feedback just triggering on its own that negative kind of threat response, whoa, actually, feedback is a gift. It's a reward. So 2 guiding principles then to help us make sure that we don't trigger that kind of fight or flight and that our gift lands well. The first one, these aren't new, but the first one is timeliness. In our old performance culture, we save feedback for the annual review. But by then, the event is 6 months or possibly 12 months even, kind of old. The learning opportunity is gone. And the surprise element of the fact that we're now talking about something that occurred 6, 7, 8, 9+ months ago triggers that certainty threat. But in a continuous performance culture, we can address these issues proactively and immediately. Timely feedback minimises that threat because it reduces the surprise factor and it gives the clearest path to correction. The second principle is the situation behaviour impact model, the SBI model, as it's often referred to. And the SBI model keeps the conversation focused on actions and facts as opposed to judgment. So this framework actually maximizes fairness because it removes subjectivity and makes the conversation about what happened, not who the person is. So, situation, we start by defining the specific time and place. So, in Tuesday's meeting, when we were discussing the Q3 budget, so we know exactly what the situation was when it occurred. Then we move to behaviour, which we describe the specific observable actions. So I noticed that you interrupted Sarah 3 times. It's a specific action. We didn't just say, I thought you were rude. Yeah. So this protects the individual's status because you are critiquing a behaviour as opposed to their character. And the impact, we then explain the behaviour, the effect, the behaviour had on the team or the project that they were working on. So the impact was that we didn't get to hear Sarah's critical data and we had to backtrack later. So that shows the consequences and connects the action back to the goal. So if we have that kind of a persistent kind of performance gap, we follow the SBI model and we ensure that that conversation is constructive. So we focus first of all on the gap, using the SBI to clearly define the problem. So that's starting to create certainty. We then collaborate on the next steps. So we immediately shift from we've created the certainty, we've defined the problem. So now we want to focus in on autonomy and creating a reward. We're not going to tell you what to do. So we want to ask them, what do they believe is the best solution for this? Or what resources do you need from me to help you kind of resolve this, close the gap, let's say. That way we're giving them ownership over the solution. They own it now. And you're restoring their autonomy and reinforcing the fact that they are a competent partner in their own development. They're responsible for it. And the last one, document and follow up. So this is around the fairness. Ensure that the steps are documented and that you agree on the follow up in the next that you're going to take in the next pie check-in, because that demonstrates your fairness and consistency. So by consistently applying the SBI model and focusing on collaborative solutions, you're transforming that feedback from the kind of negative kind of attack threat into a continuous non-threatening kind of feedback for employee growth and skill mastery. So as we come to the end of the day then, in summary, the key takeaways from today: the importance of continuous coaching, the underpinning neuroscience, the scare or scarf model, the pie and the SBI models, thinking about leveraging behavioural preferences. And I want to leave you with a bit of a call to action. And when you leave here and you schedule in your next one-to-one, actually try using the pie model and focus on just one scare domain that you want to make sure you are shifting more towards the productive reward state and steer well clear of the threat and protective state. And also think about that behavioural preference of the team member and how you can adapt your approach and align it to their preferences. At that, if there are any questions or if anybody wants to pop anything in chat, something they're going to take away from today, please, by all means, do that. While you're possibly doing that, just like to say a big thank you for joining us today on the webinar, and I hope you found it helpful.